for educational purposes, we are able to share this with folks who are unable to attend today. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Yosibeth Torres to start us off. Yosibeth.
Thank you so much, Tara. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yosibeth Torres, and I collaborated along with Rosemary, Barbera, and Kristen Camacho in this cafe. I will now allow them a few minutes to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Jesus Camacho. I am a senior political science major, and yeah.
Hello, everyone. Rosie Barbera, and I am in the social work department and looking forward to this encounter with you all. So we thought that because this is a topic that is pretty sensitive, right, and that people have, some strong opinions and things on, that we wanted to make sure there were some guidelines for discussion, just so that we could keep it, collegial. And so the first is, right, we want to make sure that we provide a safe space for everyone, that people feel like they can share without being judged and without being jumped up, upon. We want to center the voices of people whose voices are often not heard or received, right? Who oftentimes are kind of shut down. Don't talk over people, wait your turn. Make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak. So, don't monopolize the conversation. Respect everyone, suspend judgment, and listen intently to learn and not to react, right? Not be listening to be able to, react to something someone's saying, listen to learn what they're saying. Not that you can't respond later, but making sure you're keeping it, in an educational kind of perspective. So thanks. Okay, so we have a poll that we wanna do now, if it works. And the question is, there's just one question, and there you go. So if you take a second to just answer this question. And actually, while people are doing that, while people are doing that, why don't we go on to the next one, and I can read this story, and then we'll go back to that and we'll show the results of the poll. So this is just a story from Eduardo Galeano, who was a Uruguayan author, and his book, The Upside Down, A Primer for the Looking Glass World. And he talks about different points of view. From the point of view of the owl, the bat, and the bohemian, sunset is a time for breakfast. Rain is bad news for tourists and good news for farmers. From the point of view of the natives, it's the tourists who are picturesque. From the point of view of the Indians of the Caribbean islands, Christopher Columbus, with his plumed cap and red velvet cape, was the biggest parrot they had ever seen. From the point of view of the South, summer in the North is winter. From the point of view of a worm, a plate of spaghetti is an orgy. Where Hindus see a sacred cow, others see an enormous hamburger. From the point of view of his neighbors in the town of Cardona, Toto Zog, who wore the same clothes in summer and winter, was an admirable man. Toto's never cold, they said. He said nothing. He was cold, but he had no coat. So Tara, if you could go ahead and share the results of that survey, and we'll take a look and see what people said. Oh, there it is. It showed up on my other monitor, sorry. That's what happens when you have two monitors here. So interesting, all right. So 85% of folks said that there are 7 continents, 3% said 9, 3% said 8, and 10% said 5. And the reason for starting with this particular question is, and when we're talking about the curriculum and how the curriculum represents, or what it represents and who it represents, is because in the United States we learn that there are 7 continents, but in other countries people learn that there are 5 continents. There's America, North and South as one. There's Africa, Asia, Europe, and there's Oceania. In other places, people learn that there are 6 continents. Still, America is one continent, north and south. And so we see the world differently. And if we see the world differently in something like that, that's so something we take for granted, because we really do take that for granted, then what other ways might we see the world differently?
And as Dr. Barbera mentioned, so 2 questions to keep in mind as we proceed with the cafe is what influences how we see the world and what happens when our worldview is questioned. And those 2 questions can really allow us to maybe understand why today we had completely different responses. And as Dr. Barbera mentioned, when we apply that to the curriculum, things that seem so factual and standard that we apply to curriculums in all universities are actually completely different, and therefore students will experience them differently depending on past influences. And then also I would say the second question, that purpose of that was also to kind of become a bit more emotionally vulnerable when we think and to consider how we feel when standard assumptions or facts that we hold to be true are questioned. So moving forward, of course, think about those influence, but also how you felt when you realized that not everybody here had the same exact view as you. So in order to construct this cafe, we utilized a survey. And what we did was we asked LaSalle students from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups to talk to us about how they experienced the curriculum at LaSalle and to see if they felt represented. So now moving forward, we're going to actually present some of those answers and provide some analysis. So starting off, Christian Camacho will introduce one of the responses.
Yeah. So to kick off, one of the responses we received was one on the screen, such as a student in STEM, I do not feel like my classes represent me nor my identity. There's a very small amount of POC staff and faculty, which makes it difficult for them to connect to students of different ethnic backgrounds, or even difficult for them to relate the material to students of different ethnic backgrounds, especially when trying to use course materials in real life application. Even when inviting outside professionals to speak to students, 9 times out of 10, it is not a POC. In the case where it is a POC, we make it a super big deal about the speaker being a POC, which I think almost limits. So I wanted to point this one out particularly because I kind of want to bring to the table the power of having a POC being present. You know, being a Hispanic male and coming from a family from Puerto Rico, you know, I can go back into all different times of, you know, when in a class you're like, oh well, you know, how many states are there? 50. Okay. But then here I am thinking like, all right, but when can I speak about Puerto Rico? When can I say, all right, well, you know, when can I have the I don't know, I guess the word I'm looking for is when can I have the excitement of saying, wow, my grandparents, you know, where they were born, my roots, we are a state, yet we are in the shadows of America. We are a territory, and that can go on for other territories within America as well. So I kind of want to bring up that, you know, non-POC can work all, you know, as much as they can addressing these issues, so on and so forth. But there is that connection that comes from a staff, faculty, person of color to feel what it is to have more than just a meeting. If I go meet somebody who is from Puerto Rico, who is from Yauca, or just from Puerto Rico in general, we see these similarities. And also with being a first generation college student, I imagine, not that I imagine, I know that when I go to these professors and we have these similarities, I don't feel so ashamed. I don't feel frightened. So, yeah.
So the next quote that we're going to present also connects to STEM. Throughout the survey, a lot of the responses actually spoke on the STEM department and on STEM classes here at LaSalle. So the STEM classes perpetuate racism in that they have that weed out mentality and tell students that they will not pass. This especially affects BIPOC because the students are already isolated in these classes, which leads them to be unsuccessful. In art classes, much of the art was created by white people of European descent. It always comes to the idea that whiteness is beauty when that is not always the case. In humanities classes, much of the ideas and theories they have are based upon white people and how life affects white people. So this was really a striking response because I think here we see multiple aspects starting off in the end with the actual content of the course and how a lot of courses can be very European centered, and they leave out a lot of the central people from other areas of the world that are often within our LaSalle population. And then additionally, I really centered on this part that said they have that weed out mentality, because in theory, maybe that's something that we can appreciate, that eventually you gather a bunch of students and you'll somehow reach like an optimal group of students. But in reality, that only works if we're assuming that all students have the same exact starting point. So once people come from different backgrounds and they're in these STEM courses, especially, it's completely different for them. And then additionally, this quote will also kind of put into question what really is the role of faculty with students that are sometimes underrepresented. It like really, sure, a faculty's job is to teach and to make sure the content gets across, but there's also a part of it where we should encourage students that do feel underrepresented instead of telling them that they will not pass.
With moving forward, this quote, another quote coming from the survey is, not when the professor inhibits students to share other perspectives and point of views, especially when they are BIPOC and the teacher is Caucasian, perpetuating stereotypes that BIPOC students struggle with certain topics or materials. This seems to be a common issue, especially when a student of color is kind of pointed out, singled out in the whole class from an issue related to their culture. It kind of makes them feel, like a trophy, like kind of like, oh, well, we have the students, so we are able to go to them for information. When not necessarily all students of color have experienced the same issues historically. People of color they're not trophies within a classroom. If there's a class discussion, volunteership is preferred over being popcorn. We are all the same, but this idea of pushing somebody to the limit of singling them out of the classroom to have a conversation and to speak their dialogue on this issue, it kind of doesn't give them that community feeling. It erases the feeling of community within a community space.
We're just going back and forth on these, so excuse me if I don't give a nice transition. So this response specifically restates what Christian just mentioned. So no, most classes are based on the thought that all students had the same easy life. No, I don't think so, because online school gives me other distractions like work, family, and more at the same time that classes are happening. Especially now, I feel that as POC, there is not much that respects who I am. So this quote in particular, the second one, I really wanted to center on because it shows just how much this pandemic has disproportionately affected everybody, even when it comes to education. So while there's obviously a bunch of parts of the pandemic that we don't enjoy, it also has brought a lot of things to life when you see just how differently everybody has experienced it, and that includes the curriculum. And then no, most classes are based on the thought that all students had the same easy life. I can especially relate to that one because I remember like the school district that I came from, it wasn't awful, but definitely not compared to some of my peers. When I first walked into philosophy class, I had no idea who the hell Plato was, like, and then the teacher was like, oh yeah, Plato, you guys know Plato. Like, no, not everybody knows who that is. And it really puts a toll on students because you feel isolated and you feel like you're automatically less than everybody else in your course. And that's really something that curriculum, especially at LaSalle, should not reinforce.
Thank you for that, Yosibeth. Moving forward, one thing that I kind of have been noticing through these surveys is the topic of business majors. Business majors are, I'm not going to say all, but some business majors feel as if, they just want to have a tunnel vision towards whether it be accounting, finance, so on and so forth, that they don't have to necessarily answer to the outside, or they don't have an education from the outside. Time and time again, I've been a part of the LaSallian Colleges and Universities and Association for Justice, the International Association of LaSalle Universities, all collaborative efforts to address the LaSallian mission, but I have nobody from the business school. I have everybody from arts and sciences, go department-wise, political science, sociology, religion and theology. So we kind of want to dissect this quote by saying, you know, my major is business, so I'm more concerned about learning the adequate, up-to-date business material to sharpen my skills rather than think about what does or does not represent me. You know, the word, where are we at? I'm more concerned about learning the adequate, up-to-date business material to sharpen my skills. Of course, any student who is in within a business major would want to, you know, be the number one business student, you know all that they can. But up-to-date business material goes more in depth into our social atmosphere. You know, business tends to misconstrue students. Why is this? Why are business classes not discussing human history and disadvantages towards POCs? In areas like the job market or missions that are within the company, business classes should go forward and beyond to ensure that representation is present, as learning how to balance a balance sheet doesn't help when POC's voices are being misconstrued as being, let's say, too aggressive. So yeah, so definitely, you know, it's moving forward, who's to say, you know, there can't be some correlation between, you know, having business students step outside of their comfort zone and maybe taking a class within, you know, arts and sciences that kind of they can tie into business and, you know, addressing issues within the job market. You know, being able to pinpoint when there are racist ideals within hiring processes and so on and so forth.
So our next quote additionally connects to what Christian has already stated, where throughout the survey, we've noted a lot of responses from the business department like this one. Well, my classes are mainly about accounting and I believe it's universal, so I don't really know how to answer that question. And then followed by, again, I haven't experienced this. I think this brings also a great argument to our conversation where even if you haven't experienced something, that doesn't mean that you cannot assist in improving the experience for another student. Now, I have never taken any accounting or business classes, so I can't really tell you much about in that aspect. But as Christian also mentioned, there's still the inequities that we experience in the world still very much influence the business world and how people operate differently in different communities and what factors influence them. So again, just something to also think about moving forward, and that's how can we also make sure that students who maybe feel exempt from this can also contribute to making the curriculum and the whole Salle experience a lot easier for other students, or at least feel more welcoming. I wouldn't say easier, because as we also noticed, one of the assumptions throughout these surveys is that students feel they're not exactly being viewed for their abilities, and people automatically assume that they don't have the talents or capabilities necessary to succeed in certain fields.
Thank you for that, Yosibeth. And then I will conclude my quotes in reading this one that says, the departments that have leaders with distinct backgrounds tend to be more student friendly than the ones that are not. They also understand how students may feel in those departments, and therefore they provide the support needed for their students to succeed while in school. So this individual who answered this is looking more towards like a variety of departments, so on and so forth. And I kind of want to bring into fruition the empowerment of having these diverse departments. We are exploiting, and if you know me, I always love saying about our 5 core values, the 5th one, our inclusive community. Our 5th assigned core values is present. How can I, a first-generation Hispanic male, understand what a GRE is if nobody in my family has went through the GRE process? But everybody at a certain department, you know, they're all, you know, college educated. They have family history of being college educated. You know, no persons of color for me to feel comfortable speaking with. To me, I feel like if I go ask, hey, you know, could you tell me something about a GRE, instead of them being like, oh, well, what do you want to know about it? I can have somebody tell me, well, you know, all right, the GRE stands for this. It's for, you know, grad school, so on and so forth. As you can tell, I don't know too much about the GRE. That's for another time. But yeah, so definitely a key quote.
Thank you, Christian. And finally, a response that I think also emphasizes the importance of us adjusting our curriculum. So for most of my classes, yes, given that we usually tend to analyze data that includes rather socially and economically diverse populations. Also, I felt represented in my Modern Africa class, given that we analyzed key sources that originated from direct African perspectives, and we consistently discussed events occurring in Africa that I could personally relate to. I think this is a great response to end on, at least for Christian and ours presentation, because here, first, you kind of see what I would argue is a solution to a lot of the business courses, which is analyzing data that includes rather socially and economically diverse populations. And then second, we kind of see an example of a curriculum that does represent this student. And then that could kind of start as a foundation for solutions moving forward as we discuss. So the student felt represented given that they analyzed key sources that originated from direct African perspectives. So that's just one clear example on what an inclusive curriculum and what impacts it can have on a student.
Great. So they were some of the comments when we asked people, you know, does the curriculum at LaSalle, do you feel like it represents you? Here's just some other answers if you want to just take a minute or two to read through these, and then the next slide as well, and just think about kind of you know, what they represent and what they might mean for our curriculum. Okay, Yosibeth, you can go to the next one. So you see there that there are, you know, people have thought about how the curriculum affects them and where they feel themselves either represented or not. Yeah.
So now we can actually begin to discuss and reflect on the survey responses and some of what we discussed throughout this entire presentation. So here are just some questions for you all to answer while you're in breakout rooms. So what did you learn from these responses? Whose voices, perspectives, or experiences are heard in your classes? Whose voices, perspectives, or experiences are centered in your classes? And same, which ones are marginalized in your classes? And what groups of people are shown making positive contributions to the world? So I believe Tara will now put everyone into breakout rooms, and these questions will also be available in the chat for you all to look at.
Okay, I got a little nervous. I thought I was supposed to join one, but I think we'll be good.
We didn't.
Pretty good. I'm not gonna. I actually enjoyed that. I hearing myself speak. I was like, okay, all the jitters like just ran away.
That's good.
Rosie, if you can hit pause on the recording. We just see you in person.
I know. Can't wait.
Okay, everyone's back. Go for it, Christian.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being with each other within the group discussion. So, considering we have 33 people here, I guess one thing that we can do in particular is if you have anything you'd like to share with the rest of the group, please feel free to do so. I just add that please keep in I guess in mind, one person speaks at a time, so on and so forth. And I guess once you speak, kind of let until everybody else speaks, and then, you know, you may speak again. So if anybody would love to go first, please go right ahead.
Chris, I can go first.
Okay.
So a suggestion I had, I took a class, I want to say like 2 semesters ago, that was called Anti-Blackness and Racism with Dr. O'Connell. And in our breakout group, we were kind of talking about like we should integrate like a diversity course that the university should enforce, just because you need to learn those different experiences. And like the example I said in my group was that coming from my background, I didn't hear of different types of racism, colorblind racism, microaggressions, things of that nature. And taking that class really opened my eyes to see that, like, even though I grew up somewhere differently, like I can learn these things and I can make sure that they don't happen again. So like I was just thinking like maybe having a class where it's mandatory for everyone to take on diversity.
Thank you for that, Riley. Anybody else would like to input?
I'll just jump in quickly and say one of your questions was, one of the questions was, what are the voices that we can add to our class? And I put it in the group chat, just sometimes when I'm a white female, you know, like I don't have the experience, then we need to teach other perspectives. And it's a great example in art history of how, of an artist who's talking about amending art history and decolonizing the curriculum. So that's it.
Thank you for that.
I can share. The last thing our group was able to, we touched on before we broke out, had to come back, was that there was an article, Brother Ernest shared with us that there was an article in the newspaper that had LaSalle rated the top, one of the top universities in the area that was, that came in rated as the most diverse, but came in at the bottom as having the least amount of faculty of color. I shared with the group that I am a part-time student here at LaSalle, and I've been here since 2012. The good part is I basically have about 3 semesters left, so there is some light at the end of the tunnel. But it wasn't until, I think it was 2000, no, it actually was 2019, because it was when I changed my major, that I had a African-American teacher stand in front of me. So for 6 years I had been here, and all of my instructors were white. And I didn't really think about that prior to that point, but I noticed that when I walked in the classroom that first day of school, that was the first thing that stood out to me, that was the first time. And that I didn't know that he was even, I didn't even know I didn't know him. I had never heard him. And I found out why, is because he taught at night, but, and I take my classes during the day. But then that was another kind of like light bulb that went on, like, wow, I've been here for 6 years. And what if he didn't teach during the day? I may have continued my whole entire education at LaSalle and not have a, a person of color stand in front of the room and teach me. So that's what we ended on.
Thank you, Andrea. Okay, can we get why don't we do one more response, and then we'll kind of go on to like a community question.
Hi, my name's Inti. I can go. So I'm a freshman, and I haven't had very much experience with the LaSalle community yet, but I am a part of ADP, and it's a very diverse community. So I feel like I'm still sheltered from what other POC is experiencing. But I can say that something that LaSalle is doing good is so I'm from Uzbekistan, and it's a predominantly Islamic country. And ever since I've been growing up here, any type of topic of religion that we would talk about, is like Christianity, and that's all I've ever learned more about. And I don't really know much about Islam. I don't really practice it. So I have a religion class this semester, and my professor predominantly focuses on Islam, which is quite very refreshing and like nice to see. So there's still some good, I think.
Thank you so much for that, Inchi. And it's I feel great because I also am an ADP student, and it feels ADP represent. So Yosibeth, do you mind going to the next slide, please? I kind of wanted to bring just a question. We can get maybe 2 responses. What are some suggestions you have about how we together, the 33 of us, if we were all to get into a room socially distanced, of course, how we can change the curriculum to make it more representative? Let's say we bring in a new department. Let's say we were to establish a new major, a new minor, whichever that may be. I guess we can just think off the top of our heads, like what's a suggestion that could be professed out to all of us? So why don't I kick us off then? One thing in particular that I will mention later on, it was brought to, so I am a member of the Student Government Association. I have an executive board position known as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I received that position last summer, and one of the first things that was brought to my attention is the implementation of a Black Studies minor. That being said, obviously being a student, I only know so much about how the process is. I see a bunch of professors in here, heads of departments. I'm pretty sure, you guys are like, oh, don't, Christian, we got this. But what I do want to say is, being a student and seeing something of this nature being brought up is hopeful to see that, there is a light at the end of this tunnel. However, I do want to bring in that, it definitely is a start. To start to kind of bring in more representation to the university. As far as the progression goes on it, being the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I do have connects that I will be speaking to kind of just see what us students can do. Whether, let's say, we throw out a petition to kind of gain awareness for it. Maybe do a coalition with other organizations to kind of say, hey, this is a possibility. Why don't we try to push for this, or work with the Joint Commission of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, of course. So that's just, one initiative out of many. And also within SGA, we have our archivist, Emily Dorr, who does go to the library and works in the archives and kind of looks into maybe some programs we had before. I do know there was a Black Studies minor with around the, forgive me if I'm wrong with the year, but around the 90s. But yeah, so that's definitely just one, as I said, one out of many. But if anybody else would like to kind of speak on moving forward, please do. And if not, we can move on.
Well, I'll speak up. I was around here in the 90s. So again, when we talk about having these courses, Black Studies, be minors, that's one of the issues we need to really kind of leap forward and make it pretty much kind of major. We shouldn't have electives when it comes to people of color and Latinx communities, having those type of majors and courses in our curriculum. So
one of the things our commission is working on diversity, inclusion and equity and inclusion, is getting this to the forefront. So I love your idea, Christian, on a petition to really put some motion behind it. And then also, it's just the time is ever so proper for a lot of these changes to take place here at our curriculum. This is, I've had many faculty of color being here, Andrea, but I do understand that in the evening there were a lot more faculty of color in our evening classes as I went here through undergraduate and graduate. So I think we're making some strides, but definitely having the input of our students and faculty and staff and professors. I think this is, one of the ways that we can move forward in a big way.
Sherlyn, can I just add one thing to what you said? I think it's important for us to understand why that initial effort died, right? Because it was instituted by students and faculty with partnerships, all of that, right? In other words, all the things that you mentioned were there. It died because of something that is still going on. And that is when you have a curriculum that doesn't give you enough space to take courses that are offered in many disciplines, right? Students who wanted to take those courses did not, because it didn't count for anything. All right. So whatever you do, however you proceed, this has to be part of a larger way of thinking about the curriculum that makes these things count, right? So that people see, right, that they are indeed paying for something that gets them somewhere, in addition to doing something that will increase their knowledge and all of that. And it was devastating when that happened, right? So it has to be meshed with a bigger curricular effort to succeed, no matter how you begin.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Allen, and thank you so much, Sherilyn, for speaking. Dr. Allen, me and you, we will be meeting tomorrow. I do look forward to speaking to you about that. And
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
It definitely is something that has crossed my mind, and something that, us as students, and we kind of have to bring to the table and say, what can we do? What can we do to help bring this this mesh into the wider curriculum? So thank you, Dr. Allen, for that.
Sure.
All right, and then I'm also going to continue to kind of into a couple more quotes. When we were surveying these the students, we actually also asked them what they believe that we should do. And I kind of want to if you feel so inclined to please read through these 3 responses. I'll give it a minute, and then I do have a response that I want to say. So. Okay, so the one in particular on the screen is definitely talking about the honors triple. I was recently, informed by this, and being an SGA member, we have a bunch of honor students as well. Being a non-honor student, this was something that was very different for me to take in. But I kind of want to bring in into perspective, last week, the University of Pennsylvania had their MLK Day Symposium. Professor Henry L. Taylor Jr. spoke a lot about, the university must ascertain their curriculum, infuse anti-racism across all disciplines. The university must be a breeding ground for social change. We must, and what I say to this is, when we say we are a breeding ground for social change, I say that with the honors triple at just a starting point, being that on day one, if the honors triple is too Eurocentric and not represented enough, therefore something must be changed. So that was definitely something that I want to point out for all of us. And yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. Of course, please take a minute to read through these if you feel so inclined to.
Chris, maybe it's my screen, but again, it's the slide is not appearing at least fully on the screen.
My apologies about that.
Maybe it's me. I'm not sure.
You're still having the same issue, Brother Ernest?
Yeah. Do others have it, or is it just me?
I'm okay.
Okay. Oh, I see. I can move it. Yeah.
Okay. So why don't we continue onto this excuse me. I believe this is slide 21. So yes, just 1 minute to read this, and then I'll conclude with my saying.
And I'm sure you can all have access to this PowerPoint later too if you want to read through these responses.
All right, and then I will just say finally a pledge for action. So obviously, we all make a commitment, and I kind of want to change the wording because I feel like, oh boy, if we all make a commitment to anti-racism, we would come out of here feeling great. But I kind of feel like that was a reoccurring thing, hearing the word commitment. I want to say, why don't we have a pledge for action? As I said, we're all making these commitments towards being anti-racist, and we have been working on that daily. Only now I challenge us to pledge to continue that work and pledge for representation in our classrooms and pledge for understanding. Our question to you will be, will you pledge? Will you listen? Will you speak? Will you help? And will you help us to represent?
Great. So Christian already talked about, SGA, some of the stuff they're doing. We've got some folks from the Joint Commission who are here, the Joint Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So that work is ongoing. And there's work with the Anti-Racist Working Group of the Faculty Senate with some things like looking at those proposals that have come up around a Black Studies minor. Just like Christian met with Dr. Allen, I'll be doing the same and meeting with other people who have had like ideas to try to move us forward and think about ways that we can infuse our curriculum so that it matches our student population and represents our student population, and also just gives us all a wider worldview, which of course is beneficial to everyone.
I'd like to make a commitment as the Dean of Arts and Sciences. So I just pulled up our strategic plan, which was adopted in the fall. And we have an overarching objective to increase opportunities for students to learn about power, privilege, and social justice. And there are a series of action items for that. including encouraging participation in the Together and by Association courses, which entail more community-based learning, a few things. But one of the action items is to support the development of multicultural curricula and degree or certificate programs. And the example is minor in Black studies. So, that doesn't mean it's a done deal, but it is in our strategic plan as something that we want to work toward as the School of Arts and Sciences. Now, there are things that need to happen for something like that to happen, right? We need to get some people together to, actually develop a curriculum and put it through a curriculum process. But I can tell you that I started my career as professor of English and African American Studies at the University of South Carolina. I've been a professor of Black Studies. I believe it's an important curriculum for all students, right? That race is such an important kind of topic and organizing principle in American culture. So just know that that's something that is in our strategic plan that we would like to support. And we are going to be working in the coming 3 years to implement the strategic plan, but it is there, it's written down. So it's a commitment to at least support and advocate for those efforts.
Do we have a minute for me to add something else? Is that okay? What I want to say is I had an experience a year ago that really made me think about my own role here. I was assigned, as I have been for many years, to teach a course in British literature from the Middle Ages through the 18th century. And other than doing slave narratives in the 18th century, right, and talking about issues of race and gender and historical things going on at the time, right, it was absolutely clear to me, right, that this was not satisfactory, right? And in particular, I had a student who, I'm remembering the initial conversation of Plato, who was Plato. I had a student who would say things like, well, who is Chaucer? And all of the way through here. And it became clear to me that I wasn't handling this well, right? That I was, despite all my knowledge of not doing this, I was putting some of this on the student. And I was aware as I was doing it that this was horrible and I shouldn't be doing it. And I don't do it in other courses. It occurred to me that it was because it was this course that had a prescribed, essentially, curriculum that had expanded in gender, but it had not in any of the books that you use for this, right, expanded beyond that. And I knew better, right? And my response, because I hadn't figured out what to do for future, is I'm never going to teach this course again. I just said no. Right? Now I'm trained to teach that course. And I'm essentially good at it. And I've decided that because I can't do this in it, my pledge was I'm not going to do that course again. Because I can't do it in a way that made me comfortable with what I was doing. And so I would go back to ask the question of which courses we think are important, which things that our students should take, right? Not just in English, but in everything, right? If we don't ask that question, then even well-intentioned, and I might add well-trained people, are going to make errors like I made. So my individual pledge was very different than Pamela's to make sure. Yeah, I do say enslaved people, by the way, Yosibeth, right? Usually, right? And I do try very hard to do the right thing. But if a course or a curriculum isn't going to allow that, we need to reassess that. And I've got to either learn how to do it better or not do it. And in fact, I think we ought to ask the question of courses like that are critically necessary right now for our students. So.
Thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure working on this. I don't know if Yosibeth and Christian want to chime in at all, but we've, we've learned a lot, I think, in the process as well and grown, and we're really grateful for your participation today.
Yes, and just to echo, thank you everyone for coming. We had a great conversation, and it's only onwards from here. So thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting.
Yes, thank you for attending, and hopefully the conversation just doesn't end with this cafe, because as we all saw, we definitely need to consider our curriculum more moving forward.